Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 1st of April. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks for joining us on this damp but fresh day here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome. Let's take a look at the headlines. President Park Geun-hye presses lawmakers to reach a deal on reforming Korea's public pension system, saying the future of the country depends on it. Two of Korea's biggest groups, Samsung and LG, call a halt to all of their pending legal disputes and pledge to resolve their differences out of court. Plus, Iraq's Prime Minister says the country's security forces have recaptured the city of Tikrit from Islamic State militants. We begin with efforts to resolve the decades-long deficit in Korea's public pension system, with the reform drive topping the political agenda this week. President Park Geun-hye has been stressing the need to create a sustainable retirement system for public servants, but the political discord at the National Assembly rumbles on. Our Park Ji-won starts us off.
Korea's pension plan for public servants has been in deficit since the mid-1990s, with shortages filled by taxes. To address this pressing matter, President Park Geun-hye, speaking at Tuesday's cabinet meeting, called on the National Assembly to urgently address these public servant pension reforms for the future of the country.
국회가 시한 내에 이 연금 개혁을 마무리 짓지 못하면 내년부터는 매일 100억 원씩 연간 3조 7천억 원의 세금이 들어가야 하고.
President Park stressed that these reforms should be carried out in a way that efficiently reduces the government budget, but also demonstrates fairness and sustainability to Koreans. Both political parties previously agreed to pass the reform plan at the full assembly on May 2nd. However, on Tuesday, they failed to form a working group for negotiations on the reforms.
The main opposition has been saying that they have strengths in economic affairs. But I'd like to ask them how they can say such things when they drag on and oppose the pension reforms.
It is unacceptable that the government tries to get through the reforms with the ruling party leading the process, with a limited deadline just like a military operation. The reforms should be proactively led by the government, like labor management negotiations.
Meanwhile, public sector unions said they will not participate at the negotiating table if the May 2nd deadline is upheld. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Washington's defense chief Ashton Carter is due in South Korea next week for talks with top Korean officials. The agenda will mainly focus on the threat posed by North Korea, but there's still speculation that Carter will want to talk about deploying a controversial U.S. missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter is scheduled to visit Seoul for the first time next week for talks with his South Korean counterpart, Han Min-gu. A South Korean government source says Carter will arrive for a two-day visit starting April 9th. During his talks with Han and President Park Geun-hye, Carter is expected to discuss ways to better deal with North Korean issues and to boost the two countries' military alliance. But the main focus is on whether the deployment to South Korea of a U.S. missile defense system called THAAD will be on the agenda.
Since THAAD is a hot issue, it looks unlikely it will be formally mentioned, but there's a high possibility it could be discussed informally on the side.
It's an issue that has stirred controversy both at home and abroad, with China and Russia both expressing their strongly opposition to it. Carter is known to be a strong advocate of the THAAD system. During his confirmation hearing in February, he emphasized the need to beef up missile defense, calling North Korea's ballistic missile capabilities a direct threat to the United States and South Korea. Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, who was in Seoul last week, said he had productive discussions with his South Korean counterpart, Choi Yoon-hee, about building an integrated air and missile defense system in South Korea. Officials in Seoul say that did not come up during their discussion. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has dismissed concerns that Korea is stuck between the world's two superpowers in terms of its foreign policy. At a luncheon on Tuesday, the president was quoted as saying that one does not need to worry about Seoul being caught in the middle of the US and China when referring to Korea's decision to join a China-led regional bank and a pending decision over whether or not to bring in that controversial US missile defense system known as THAAD. She reportedly added that Korea makes such decisions based on a pool of information and with dignity. US Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew says Washington is looking forward to cooperating with the China-led regional bank. According to Chinese media reports, Lew said cooperation between the two countries can be carried out through the China-US Strategic and Economic Dialogue, the World Bank, and this new bank, China's led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, these comments came during a meeting between Lew and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang in Beijing. Lew also welcomed China playing a bigger role in global economic affairs. The China Daily reported, however, that some observers see Lew's comments as the US ruling out the possibility of joining the AIIB. The meeting came ahead of the March 31st deadline for nations to apply to become founding members of the bank, which had raised speculation Lew may discuss US participation. North Korea has stated that it has no interest in holding negotiations with anyone on giving up its nuclear arsenal. Voice of America reports that a North Korean official who asked not to be named said Pyongyang sees no need and is not interested in resuming the long-stalled six-party talks on its denuclearization. There has been speculation the US could try and initiate talks with North Korea on the issue if it made a breakthrough in its ongoing multilateral nuclear talks with Iran. The North Korean official said the US should denuclearize first before demanding his country do it. And a former US nuclear negotiator says it is going to be very hard for the Obama administration to draw up a new nuclear deal with North Korea. Speaking at a meeting hosted by US website 38 North, Robert Gallucci said, even if the US president can reach a nuclear agreement with Iran, it will be hard to achieve one with Pyongyang. Gallucci said that senior officials in nuclear talks with Iran right now also deal with North Korea's nuclear programs, pointing out that the officials can't have too many agendas on their plate all at once. He says striking deals with both countries is not impossible, but the prospects aren't bright because it's such a difficult task. Gallucci was credited with defusing the first North Korean nuclear crisis by negotiating the 1994 agreed framework deal with Pyongyang. Korea has slammed Japan for its attempts to push the candidacies of some highly controversial industrial sites to UNESCO's World Heritage List. These sites in question are where many Koreans were forced to work under Japan's colonial rule in the early 1900s. Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Korea has reiterated its opposition to the possible listing of a group of Japanese industrial facilities on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Seoul's foreign ministry said Tuesday that the Meiji industrial sites, where tens of thousands of Koreans were forced to work under Japanese rule in the early 1900s, should not be recognized as intangible cultural assets.
To list these facilities, with their painful history of forced labor for Koreans under Japan's colonial rule, as a World Heritage Site does not correspond with the discipline and purpose of UNESCO.
However, there are reports that the International Council on Monuments and Sites, or ICOMOS, said Japan's industrial facilities are qualified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, upping Tokyo's chances. ICOMOS, a non-government advisory body for UNESCO, held 2 rounds of meetings last December and this month to review the applications for new World Heritage listings. For Japan, the 28 sites, mainly located in Kyushu, are proud relics from its Meiji Industrial Revolution. For Korea, they are painful reminders of Japan's colonial rule. The final verdict will be released at the 39th session of the World Heritage Committee in Germany this summer. 21 member countries, including Korea and Japan, will vote on the issue. The sites need at least 2/3 of the votes to be approved. And until then, the foreign ministry here in Seoul says it will continue its efforts to prevent the Japanese sites from receiving UNESCO recognition. 황상희, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now it's some economic news. Korea's industrial output rose at the fastest pace in nearly 4 years last month. But the rise came largely from temporary factors, so questions still linger over the health of the nation's economic recovery. Park Geun-hye has this report.
February was bullish, with production across all industries in Korea going up by 2.5% from the previous month. That marks a rebound from a 2% drop in January and the biggest monthly hike since March 2011. But when taking a look at the underlying trend of figures, it's not all rosy.
The pickup came from a low base effect in January and a rise in demand thanks to the Lunar New Year holiday that fell in February this year. It's better to average the output growth for the first 2 months, as the holiday sometimes falls in January.
The Finance Ministry also says that the output figure for all of January and February rose a mere 0.1% compared to the fourth quarter last year, pointing to a still fragile recovery momentum. Given that attention is now focused on the March figures, will they back up a solid growth trend or remain sluggish, making it more difficult for economic policymakers to prop up the ailing economy?
Whether the figures for exports, investment, and consumption improve in March will help determine the pace of recovery.
The Finance Ministry, however, expects the trend of low oil prices and the low key rate to benefit the economy, gradually strengthening Korea's recovery momentum. By sector, output in mining and manufacturing went up 2.6% in February from the previous month, thanks to strong demand for automobiles and semiconductors. Service sector output rose 1.6%, while retail sales spiked nearly 3%. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, it used to be the case in Korean society that older Korean people would stay with their adult children when they got old. But these days, many Korean senior citizens over the age of 65 say they're not living with their children and they're not receiving any financial help from them either. And that's raising questions over whether the government is ready to handle the rapidly aging population here in Korea. It's a problem that's going to get even worse as the years go by. Shin Se-min reports.
Nearly 15% of the Korea's population is 65 or older, a sign that the country is on the path to becoming a senior society. But instead of feeling more independent, many seniors are growing insecure. Korea's Welfare Ministry said Tuesday that 7 out of 10 seniors are either living with their spouse or on their own without any help from their children. A survey last year of nearly 10,500 seniors by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs also showed 3 in 10 were working post-retirement to support daily living costs. This is raising questions about whether there's enough government support for the country's rapidly aging population. But some experts say the problem stems from traditional customs.
Unlike many Western countries, most Korean parents support their children through college and even till they get married. So while the parents or the elderly in this case are economically active, they aren't saving as much for their age years, eventually forced to make more even when they're old.
Chung added that government initiatives to help seniors should improve, like broadening the reach of pension programs. Meanwhile, younger generations should start saving up earlier to lighten the load for their parents and give them more opportunity to save for their golden years. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, 2 of Korea's biggest conglomerates, Samsung and LG, have called a truce and agreed to stop all legal disputes among their group affiliates. The decision revolves 5 conflicts, including a battle over an alleged act of vandalism by LG employees. Samsung, in this case, accused LG of deliberately wrecking its washing machines at the Germany-based IPA Electronics show last September. In response to that, LG filed a charge against Samsung for technology theft of its OLED technologies. Now, specific details on how this agreement was reached were not disclosed, but the 2 conglomerates said they'll try and avoid lawsuits and settle their differences through dialogue in the future. Now, in the ongoing fight against the Islamic State group, forces in Iraq are declaring a major victory in Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit. For more on this and other global stories we are following at this hour, we connect to the news centre where our Eunice Kim is standing by with all the developments. So, Eunice, Iraq's Prime Minister has claimed that Tikrit has been reclaimed from IS hands, but has it really?
Well, Mark, we are learning that it may still be premature to say that all of Tikrit has been taken back by the joint Iraqi forces, but gains made into the center of the city was followed by Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi making this announcement to ambassadors at the Foreign Ministry headquarters.
We announce to you and to the people the good news that our brave forces entered the center of Tikrit. Our ground forces have managed to liberate this land with the blood of Iraqis alone.
Iraqi TV had also showed the national flag flying from a government building in downtown Tikrit, and earlier the Prime Minister's official Twitter account had congratulated Iraqi security forces and what it called popular volunteers, referring to the Iran-backed Shiite militia, on the historic milestone. But various reports from the ground say that the fighting is continuing, with hundreds of IS militants still holding at least 3 neighborhoods within Tikrit. The fighting has been enduring for 4 weeks now, and most of the city, once home to some 200,000 people, had mostly been emptied out ahead of the military operation. A victory in Tikrit would, of course, hold both a symbolic and strategic importance for Iraqi forces, as well as it would clear the way to another IS-held key city, that is Mosul to the east.
And Eunice, meanwhile, in nuclear talks, they're continuing well into early Wednesday morning, local time in Switzerland, about these Iran nuclear talks. All parties have agreed to extend the talks for several more hours. And they said they've done this because they've been having productive conversations.
Yeah, that's right. And that announcement was made just hours to go to their self-imposed deadline. Iran's senior negotiator saying that he was willing to talk until all unresolved issues were resolved.
Sanction relief issue has been resolved. Not today or yesterday. We have had long discussions on this, but there are issues which are related to sanctions, which are still under consideration.
The White House also said that Washington was willing to continue the momentum until all sides arrive at a workable preliminary political agreement that will be used as a basis for a comprehensive nuclear deal that will come in the next 3 months. But as it is the final stretch mark, there are reports that France and the U.S. are threatening to pull out if some type of a draft agreement is not reached by dawn. Representatives from the UN Security Council countries, Germany and Iran, have been locked in talks for nearly a week to end a 12-year standoff between the West and Iran over its nuclear ambitions.
Okay, Eunice. Yeah, thank you. And if you have any updates for us on that Iran nuclear talk story, we'd love to hear it when we see you back again at noon.
You got it.
And a good Wednesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the 56th ranked Korean national football team who went up against the 134th ranked New Zealand squad at the Seoul World Cup Stadium last night. Now a rather slow match with the rain coming down a bit throughout the night, but in the 37th minute of the match, a penalty is called on the New Zealand goalkeeper and a spot kick for Son Heung-min, but that chance is wasted as Marinovic goes to the right for the save and it's 0-0. A minute later, Marinovic with another super save keeps the score at 0-0 as Chaduri subbed out at the 42nd minute of the match. And going into the second half, match remains scoreless until Uli Stilleke's latest pick, Lee Jae-sung, pokes one past the goalkeeper, and that's the game winner as Korea beats New Zealand 1-0. Your final score. Now, many would agree that the biggest highlight of the match last night was the retirement ceremony for Cha Do-ri, who played his final match with the national team last night. And during the halftime, the fans and the players celebrated the defender's career with gifts and award for his contribution to the game as a national team player. Now, playing in 76 A matches, the Chaminator made his national team debut back in 2001 against Senegal, as he was known as one of the most entertaining footballers in the nation. Now, with fans holding up signs that read #ThankYou Cha Do-ri, the emotional Cha Do-ri closed the retirement ceremony with a memorable speech to the fans. And now moving over to the 2014-2015 KBL Championship Series between the defending champions Ulsan Mobis Phoebus and the Wonju Dongbu Promi, as Mobis went into Game 2 leading the series 1-0. But in Game 2, Dongbu off to a great start as they take a slim 22-20 lead in the first quarter before going into halftime with a 43-35 lead. But the second half of the game, Mobis showing why they're the defending champions as they combine both offense and defense in the third quarter to outscore Dongbu 24-9 to take a 59-52 lead going into the fourth quarter. And despite Dongbu trying to bounce back late in the game, Moon Tae-young's 30 points too much for Dongbu as Mobis takes a 2-0 series lead with an 83-65 victory. And now over to Game 3 of the Women's V-League Championship with the IBK Altos one win away from winning the championship trophy against Korea Expressway. And just like the first two games of the championship series, IBK continues to spread the offense around the same three attackers in Destiny Hooker, Park Geun-hye, and Kim Hee-jin. And with the three scoring in double digits in all three games, Nicole Fawcett and Korea Expressway have no chance whatsoever, as IBK takes this in 3 sets to claim their first title since the 2012-2013 season. Well, congratulations to them, and that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. It was light, but we had a very good rain yesterday. It washed away dust in the air, and all the dry weather watch has been lifted. And it seems like most of the rain clouds have moved away from the peninsula, and we have a decent afternoon of sunny spells ahead of us. The whole nation had a mild morning to kick off the day, and readings have broken into teens already, and maximum temperatures will be warmer than yesterday. So let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The daytime high here in Seoul will rise to 18, and Daegu and Busan will peak at 15 and 16 respectively. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 19, while Dokdo peaks at 11. Now, one more round of heavier rain is in the forecast for tomorrow afternoon, which will last till Friday morning, and seasonal temperatures will return. And you know, it's April, a month of cherry blossoms, and actually cherry blossoms have already started to bloom down south and should reach peak bloom at the end of this week. And up here in Seoul, we'll see full bloom in about 2 weeks from today. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's going to do it for us for now. Have a great day, and thanks as always for watching. I'm Mark Broome, and I'll be back with Ojin Ju at noon Korea time. We do hope to see you then. Goodbye.